Folks, welcome back. It's the weekly webinar. I'm Dr. James. He's Dr. Mike. How's it going, Mike?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's kind of weird out here. So, it's winter time and we're far enough north where the sun never really goes up into the sky. It just hangs low. So every room in the house, I'm blinded. I was trying to get set up for the webinar. You can see the sun's blaring in on me. So apologies in advance if it's a little goofy on the light side. My house, the sun just is just ever present in the wintertime. So I'm just trying to figure out a good spot.
Fuck.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we?
Yeah, let's get to it.
A, or A minus, rather.
Let's see. Come on. Control F. A minus. Like this?
Yeah, except capital A.
There we go.
Boom. A minus asks, what's the best way to log/write down your training to improve on next week? Do you prescribe RIR and rep range and write your reps down? If so, how do you plan your progression for next week? So you can go to a video on the RP Strength YouTube called the match or beat rep weight system. All right, just Google that, Google progression or progression formula, progress formula. And there's a whole video about how we recommend doing it, or just one of the options. Basically, you start out your first microcycle with a target rep range and an RIR, and you just hit whatever reps you're going to hit. And then the next week, you try to either use a slightly heavier weight and get the same reps, or 1 or 2 more reps per set to target either the same RIR or 1 RIR lower. So if you did 3 RIR in week 1, you can try to target 3 RIR again, or even target 2 if you like. So for people that like long progressions, they can target the same RIR twice and then get an 8-week or more meso out of it. For people that like shorter progressions, they can target 4. They can target the next one. So it's RIR 3, then 2, then 1, then 0. So that's probably the best way to do it. And then when you have the RIR target, you probably want to beat something by a little bit of weight and or repetition. And if you notice that on that set, once you did it, you were like, okay, that was RIR 6. Then add a rep or 2 on the next set versus the last time you did it, or add a little bit of load, and then try to, over the multiple sets, get as close to the RIR target that you actually want. If you can't perform the reps without going too low of an RIR, still perform them. And then the RIR will be way too low. You'll be very fatigued, but you will at least illustrate to yourself that your performance is objectively not improving or very fast. You can always recover and recycle after that. So we say is we don't like to get into the weeds of, I did 225 for 10 last week, 3 RIR. This week I did 3 RIR also, but I wasn't feeling as good, so I just did 225 for 9 reps. That kind of stuff psychologically can get away from you, and it can give you an easy path to avoid the really, really big, meaningful PRs. So what we would usually say is, if you did 225 for 10 last time, 230 for 10 this time, or 225 for 11. And if you really have to dip into the RIR to beat that, that's okay. Keep going. Next week might be better. But if next week's not better and you fail to perform, then you can do a mini half-week deload and then reduce some fatigue, and the next time try to get your RIR better. That's probably how I would do it. James?
Yeah, really good. And just on the other side of the question, a lot of people ask us about what programs or logging tools should you be using for this stuff. Guys, I've been using a pen and paper or my phone when we're traveling. And it's one of these things, if you're spending more time fussing about how to set up your training program in an elaborate spreadsheet or program, you're spending way too much time on that and not enough time probably training hard. The thing is, if you know how long your mesocycles generally will go, now granted, there might be some exceptions depending on what you're doing, but if you know that for the most part you're running 4 and 1s, you know that you're probably going to be doing something like a 3-2-2-1 in terms of RIR. You know you're going to have some target rep ranges per muscle or per exercise, and then you just kind of run it from there. You can either choose to increase the number of reps that you get within the same kind of or close RIR constrictions, or if you find that you are exceeding or on the very top end of your goal rep range consistently, you can always add load, and that's an easy way of auto-regulating it. I think you can be more nitpicky about these things, but what I think I think people often come with that question with the excuse of like, how do I make this as needlessly complicated as possible so I can spend less time actually focusing on what I'm supposed to be focusing on, which is just getting in there and lifting hard. So don't make it, it's one of these paralysis by analysis situations. It's once you have the general patterns, and granted, these programs can be helpful for you in determining some of these general patterns, but we're assuming that most of you guys are at least kind of intermediates and have a pretty good idea of what you're doing more often than not. And if that's the case, just log how much weight you got, what the reps you got, and go from there. You don't really need to do a whole lot more than that.
Excellent answer. Up next is Omkar Ranne.
Oh, nice and easy right there.
Would it be a good idea to do incline presses after a shoulder press during a push day? I've heard that the front delts would already be taxed and a flat press would be a better idea than an incline. It kind of depends on what you want out of that. But if you do a shoulder press first, you're automatically, it doesn't matter what you do after, prioritizing front delts anyway. And then if you do an incline press, they again get hit really, really hard. And there could be a situation where your pecs can work pretty hard to make up the difference. But since systemic fatigue is a little higher by then, they probably won't see the same really good activity. So, you will have predominantly another front delt exercise. If front delts are your priority, then, and your upper pecs are something you want to keep on the back burner, and your lower pecs are also something you want to keep on the back burner, but your upper pecs are a little bit more important, doing shoulder press first and incline second is totally great. If front delts are not your priority and pecs are your priority, yeah, I wouldn't do shoulder press first. That would be kind of weird. And if you wanted to prioritize mid and lower pec sort of as well as your front delts, you can do shoulder press heavy first, but then absolutely I would do something like a flat press or some flat decline flies, decline dips where the front delts really aren't very active at all and it's mostly pecs.
Yeah, and one other situation you can run into if you're deciding to do the shoulder press and then the incline press is that your delts can become the limiting factor on the performance of your chest movement, which is really just a shitty situation to find yourself in. Now, that might be different depending on your technique and your anthropometry. Some people might not run into that issue. I know for myself, I for sure would run into that issue where if I did heavy shoulder presses and then tried to incline bench, my shoulders would just crap out and my chest would be like, well, this was stupid. Why did we do this? Why did you just do that incline bench first? Whereas like the reverse, I could probably pull off just fine. So it's going to be a little bit different from person to person, but you don't want the, you want the limiting factor on any given exercise to be the muscle that you're targeting, not the other, assistance muscles. So keep that in mind.
Next up, Zachary Fiesel.
Oi. ZACH, there we go.
I'm getting crushed with fatigue / overtraining before reaching the end of my mesocycle. What are order of hierarchy of modifications to make to the meso more survivable? Potential solutions: programming additional rest days, decreasing frequency.
Sorry, so real quick, this is covered explicitly in the Recovering from Training book, by the way. There's actually like there's an infographic that literally has a hierarchy of what you need to do in this situation.
For sure. Well, let's try to get a little bit going here. And then if Zachary, if you want any more insight, then that's absolutely the book to look at for you. Potential solutions: programming additional rest days, decreasing frequency, adding fewer reps per week, i.e. hard stop of 1 to 2 additional reps no matter what. May not actually lead to decrease of RIR week to week if adapting / getting stronger. So that's not a good idea. Shortening meso length, currently at 4 to 1, 3 to 1, a significant reduction in training. Yes, but it probably is equivalent in terms of results or pretty close. Slowing weekly set additions. So I'll just talk about these as they come. Let's see. Program additional rest days is totally fine, especially if you are training often and the oftenness of the training is burdensome. So if you ever have the idea in like week 3, you look at your weekly schedule, like, fuck, I have so much training to do. And it's not that you look at the training and you're like, that's not a lot of training, but it's going to be really hard. Because if like you train four times a week and each session is high quality and super fucking hard, and then you're fucked up, reducing from there is not a good idea. But if you're trying to train like 6 or 8 times a week, maybe reducing is fine. What you can also do, which you didn't mention, is do priority, depriority. So you can train half your body really hard and the other half kind of have it on a back burner. And then even with more training days, you just aren't really fucking up your whole body as much, and you don't pay the cost fatigue-wise like that. As a matter of fact, when someone reaches a state where they can't get through their normal mesocycle, James and I that's our official cutoff of when you should start considering specialization phases, priority phases. And to put it another way, if you come and tell James and I that you've never run into systemic fatigue ever, and you say, should I do a specialization phase? We're going to be like, not really, because you can probably just keep growing all your muscles at the same time. No big deal, right? Adding fewer reps per week. Remember, we want quality first. So you add only as many reps per week as hits your RIR targets. So that's not really a negotiable. It is negotiable in like a cutting phase under some extreme circumstances where you're making really notable trade-offs for progress, but in favor of fatigue management. But look, like if you want fatigue management to be number one just to do an arbitrary muscle length, that's fucking stupid. So don't fuck with the repetitions. Let's see, shortening meso length you can do. That's totally fine, but there are other ways around it. Of course, that's your line of last resort there. Slowing weekly set additions. You don't want to slow weekly set additions. Remember, weekly set additions should always and everywhere be auto-regulated. Are you getting good pumps? Are you getting disruption? Are you healing on time? If the answer is yes, don't add any sets. But if you are doing a certain number of sets and you're like, man, I could be recovering from like fucking way more than this, then it's time to start adding sets. And how many do you add is enough to start challenging yourself again to where you're at, pushing your limits of recovery, which is, you're getting all the programs. So the slowing weekly set additions is something you can do, again, there's like repetitions on a cutting phase where just getting through a long mesocycle at maintenance volume is a priority. But for you, for normal hypertrophy meso, I wouldn't fuck with those. I would just auto-regulate them. And then starting at lower starting set volume is not a good idea because you have to do whatever is your MEV or your best approximate. Something James and I hate seeing is, so like, hey, notice you're starting with 3 sets of quads. Why do you start with 3? And they're like, well, if I start with 5, I can only go 3 weeks and then I have to deload. Like, I got you. Does 3 stimulate you? They're like, no, it feels like a warm up. And then next week's 4 also a warm up. And like, okay, so for 2 weeks, you're not growing. You're training. What the fuck are you doing? Like, get in, get out, deload when you have to. So I would say the number one advice is read the book that we have on recovering from training, and it has much better description. But I would say that first, consider specialization phases. If that doesn't remediate, consider additional rest days. And just on the training end, because you can sleep and eat more, and all this will fix itself. And then only after that, should you consider shortening meso length, and then all these other things, unless you're pushing it way too hard, which you could be. If you're pushing appropriately hard, adding reps, adding load appropriately hard, adding sets appropriately hard, then you just don't fuck with that, because that's the quality of what makes your program actually cause gains, instead of just being able to say, I did 4 weeks of something. Congratulations, nobody gives a shit. I'll say this, 3 weeks of high quality training followed by deload beats the shit out of 4 weeks of low quality training any fucking time. James?
Yeah, I liked your responses. I'm actually going to go a slightly different route, because I think, Zachary, what you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, which means you're fussing over the details before you've really hammered down the basics. So whenever you're having the situation where you're kind of prematurely dealing with fatigue or overreaching, it really is a simple matter, which is you're just doing too much, right? Your volume landmarks are not in order, period. That's just the way it goes. And that's the first problem that you have to fix. So all these other things are basically ways of like, how can I keep my fucked up basics and circumvent the problem, right? And it's just going to end up leading back to the same problems ultimately. These are things that you can do, but are not going to have the effect that you want, because they're not powerful enough to fix the bigger problem, which is that you're just doing too much. So at some point, you're going to have to reevaluate your MEVs and your MRVs, and that's going to be step one, right? From there, you can play around with things like frequency and stuff like that. What I would say is reevaluate MEV, reevaluate your MRVs, and then also start looking at the SFR of the exercises that you are choosing. You might just find that you are doing things that are just wiping you out. The classic example for like an intermediate lifter is like somebody who deadlifts a lot. You might just find like, I just can't do deadlifts anymore because they just wipe me out and I can't continue this week to week, and that's fine. So go back, look at your basics, go back, look at the exercises that you're choosing, and you might find that you're just doing a lot of movement training and garbage volume because the exercises that you have picked are really just not that stimulative for the muscles and things that you're trying to train. So another example would be like if you have really shitty bench press and you're like, well, I'm doing 20 sets of chest per week and it just is this kind of like nonsense, right? That's just garbage at that point. If you have a really good technique on your bench press, or a really good variation on the bench press that is really good for you, maybe it's close grip bench, and you can dial in that close grip bench to the point where you only need 2 or 3 sets for an MEV. That's what you want. That also has a downstream effect on your systemic fatigue every week, because you're doing less sets to get the same amount of robust growth stimulus. Ta-da, right? Those are like the big ones that I would say. I think like looking at things like, should I be adding more reps? It's like, you're already doing too many reps. That's the problem. It doesn't matter what you add week to week at that point. So go back and look at that basic stuff first. I think this is one of those instances where you're looking at the finer details before you've addressed the core issues.
Okay. Next, we have Notepad.
Okay.
Did you find him?
I got him.
Oh, you did. What is the intra-Warsaw Pact beef behind Dr. Mike's persistent refusal to credit any form of stiff-legged deadlift to the Romanians? It's easy. The Romanians did not invent the Romanian deadlift. They were using an exercise that people in America had been using for generations, and they came over and they did a seminar and they were doing their stiff-legged deadlifts like they were, which many people in America already did. And then a couple of fucking retards in attendance at the seminar were like, hey, that's a real weird way to do them, even though people had done them for a long time. And they're like, they started the thing, well, it was a Romanian style, Romanian deadlift. And then they just kept saying that. And all of a sudden, people like to say things like Romanian deadlift because it makes it exotic. Just regular stiff-legged deadlift isn't sexy. Also, the Romanian deadlift, or whatever you have is the only proper way to do a stiff-legged deadlift. There are people who say that there's multiple types of stiff-legged deadlifts. There aren't. There's just one. It is to target your hamstrings and posterior chain. You keep your knees just slightly bent. You hinge at the hip. You keep your back straight. You go down until you feel a deep, painful stretch, and you come back up. That's it. That's stiff-legged deadlift. Now, do you start it from the ground or touch to the ground? Do you start it from a rack? That, bench pressing from your chest, pausing at the chest or not, is still bench pressing. It's just a slight variant of bench pressing. So a lot of people think these are different exercises. And then there's powerlifters that try to do a stiff-legged deadlift by essentially almost locking out their knees, rounding their back and picking up the weight. And I think they're just training wrong. They're just gigantic, roided up monsters that do whatever they want, which is fine. It's probably not a good idea for you to do. So there really is only the stiff-legged deadlift. And it has some variations. Snatch grip, for example, is a fine variation. We don't have to call it a different exercise. Pull-ups have like 18 different variations of grip and cadence and all this stuff. We just fucking call them pull-ups. So yeah, it's not a Romanian deadlift. It's a fucking stiff-legged deadlift, and the Romanians do it too.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Mike. So I've had some colleagues in the past try to differentiate the stiff-legged and the Romanian as like the stiff-legged is your leg is largely fully extended with a slight bend. The Romanian is a more pronounced bend, which takes the tension off the hamstring and puts it on the glutes, right? I think that's
a shitty glute exercise.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a needless differentiation because it ends up just being a shitty glute exercise where you could just be doing a whole bunch. I would say like you could even just do lunges at that point and get a way better glute stimulus. Jesus Christ. So I think it's like a needless level of differentiation. And if you're like, I don't know, I'm trying to like put this into words, but like that's like a needless amount of technique variation on one movement. I don't see what the point of like having that in your toolkit is if you can already do a really good stiff-legged deadlift. So take it or leave it, but I think it's stupid.
Yeah, 100%. Next up is Mantas Filiputis.
Consistent deliverer of excellent questions. It wasn't just a fluke. Wasn't a fluke.
Yeah, for sure. He was not a fluke. How can the stimulus to fatigue ratio of various athletic events be determined? Endurance running, jumping, strength, skill training. The most fundamental way is it's actually very easy to measure fatigue by performance reduction and perceptive measure. So that's easy. Now the stimulus is is often measured by performance as well, but it can be measured by how much performance yield something gives you. And it can also be measured by how difficult it is and how far it pushes your physiological systems. So for example, just a really stupid example, just to illustrate a really ridiculous example to illustrate the point. If I have you do a long, slow distance in heels, okay, literally like women's heels, but they're rigged so that they don't break, you would get an unbelievable amount of knee pain and ankle pain and probably break something running for several miles like that. And then I could ask you, like, okay, did you get a huge, crazy burn in your lungs? Did you feel like your body systems are really being pushed to the limit? And you're like, no, my fucking ankles hurt. Okay, really low stimulus to fatigue ratio. That doesn't mean you have to even measure performance yield because you knew you weren't even training hard. Now, the best stimulus to fatigue ratios are usually the ones which allow the best in-training performance yield and detection of disruption of necessary systems, while at the same time keeping fatigue low. So if I give you really excellent running shoes and I design a program of interval training for you, and you do half hour of uphill intervals running, you're going to be fucked up. Like your lungs are going to be burning. You're going to be pushing yourself like crazy, hitting PRs. If you measure power output and wattage and stuff like that, it's going to be off the charts. You're going to be having this unbelievable workout during the workout. I'll be like, how are your joints and connective tissues? Like, actually, they're quite fine. And even though there's a lot of systemic fatigue from me having to try hard, I'm comfortable in these shoes. I love the path that we're running on, and I'm super motivated to get this workout done. So I don't feel like crushed psychologically or something like 25 miles straight would crush me. Right. So a lot of times shorter workouts end up having higher stimulus to fatigue ratios. With jumping, like, are you getting really good trajectories? Are you getting really good technique? And are you hitting multiple high jumps in the same session? And is stuff feeling good? Do your knees hurt? For strength, I actually have a breakdown of this in a graduate course will be posted to YouTube soon. But basically, like, are you producing really high forces? And are you feeling the groove? You guys know how if you do low bar squats, you're really grooved in. It feels like you're not even trying and you're squatting 405 up and down. You're like, oh my God. You don't even know where the power is coming from. Someone's like, what muscle does it work? You're like, I don't know, the fucking core, some kind of hip shit. It's just, I breathe in and I feel so fucking tight, and you're grooving in. There's no misgrooving. The deadlift bar never goes away from you. It never comes too close to you. When you're doing that and you're registering the highest possible performance and training, or very high performances, that's a really good stimulus. You're just knocking out of the park. And of course, fatigue is the same. Joint and connective tissue, RP, stuff like that. Skill training is a bit tougher, but you can sort of glean stimulus to fatigue ratio based on, of course, how fatiguing it is. But also, part of fatigue there is psychological fatigue is frustration. If you have someone design a skill training program for you that's just frustrating and you aren't able to harness the skills and improve on them, that's a shitty SFR, and you won't keep training very long like that. So for skill training, is your skill training setup one that progressively makes you better at the skill or feel more masterful at the skill as the training session progresses? Do you leave the training session, and you guys that have trained martial arts, for example, or weightlifting know what this is like. James, you trained rugby, you know what this is like. You leave a really good productive skill session and be like, dude, I fucking know more shit. Like, I'm able to do more things fluidly and dynamically. My motions are better. That's a great stimulus. Whereas if you have a technique session where you're like, I don't know, things were yelled at me, I sort of did things, I'm really tired, my ankles hurt, that's a really crappy stimulus to fatigue ratio. James?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go a slightly different route. So it's interesting that you brought up like the skills idea. And really what we find is that's not so much an issue of SFR, so much as like, is the activity actually scaled to your abilities? And I actually have made like an auto-regulation checklist for coaches for skills and tactics activities based on a couple different criteria. And as Mike was saying, like when you're doing skill practice, sometimes you do get into a flow state. Sometimes you do feel like, oh, this is going so well, right? That's because you are engaged, you have like a certain level of arousal, and you're able to hit your flow state because the doses and intensities are such that it's slightly above what you're used to doing, but within your capability of doing, right? That's the idea there. So the sports, it's kind of hard to express these things in terms of stimulus to fatigue ratio. Montes, I really like your question. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been working on my other book. And one of the things that you run into is ultimately it's what Dr. Mike said, right? Is the stimulus to fatigue ratio for all activities is how much do you get out of it relative to how much you put into it. The problem with sporting activities as compared to bodybuilding is because they're constrained by specificity. So for example, if you have to do a 5K and you just happen to be a really good marathon runner, your best performances are at like marathon level pace, but 5K pace sucks dick for you. Are you going to have really good SFR training for a 5K? Probably not. Why? Because it just doesn't suit you well. Now in bodybuilding, you could just pick something else and just say like, this sucks. It doesn't work that well for me. But in this case, you're constrained by the actual sporting events that you're trying to do. Similarly, you could say like, okay, I have a basketball player. They need to be able to jump and dunk and rebound and do all that stuff. Well, you can have them do all the broad jumps and like single leg sideways jumps in the world, but ultimately they have to jump up straight up in the air. And if they're not good at it, or if doing straight up in the air jumps doesn't tickle their pickle, too bad, because that's what you got to do in basketball. So ultimately you kind of have this problem where there are things that people are better suited to doing, right? And that could include sporting activities. Unfortunately, you have to look at the outcome measurements. You say like, well, this is what you actually need to do for basketball, right? Which is, for example, let's use the example of jumping. Like, what's going to make you jumping? Being strong, being powerful, and being good at the actual action of jumping. Like, you have to train those things. There's only so much wiggle room to achieve those things within the athlete. Right now, you might say, well, you could get strong doing high bar squats, low bar squats, front squats. Yes, that's an example of where you could look at the SFR of an activity and the payout that you're going to get from it, but you're still heavily constrained in that regard. So I'm still thinking on this issue because I think it's an interesting question. The biggest roadblock that you're going to run into is the actual performance outcome goals, which is going to constrain whatever it is that you're trying to do in training. So it's a good question, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Next up is Greg Proctor.
Greg Proctor. Oh, got it.
Greg Proctor asks, I'm so used to saying says because a lot of our questions are just people saying stuff.
Yeah.
Or RP Plus, people would just say things. And it's like, sweet, that is sweet that you said that. Are grippers like Captain of Crush a waste of time? Is there any other benefits developing Crush grip? You're just getting better at the gripper. Bigger forearms? Yes. Sport performance or real world benefits? Yes. Most of the time in the gym, we're generally improving our support grip. Yeah, to some extent. Do they complement each other? Yes. Maybe getting better at crushing the barbell can aid in support of other stuff. Yes. Would like to hear your thoughts. Thanks. So basically, like, it's a dynamic way of training your forearms, which is super great. In addition to forearm curls, gripping with a big range of motion. Again, you start out nice and wide and close and crunch for a second. Nice and wide, close and crunch. That can be a really powerful hypertrophy stimulus and general grip strengthening stimulus. So, like, while in wrestling, for example, a lot of the strength is isometric as you express it. You build most of your strength in the gym for wrestling dynamically with weightlifting movements and barbell movements. So just the same way, even if you just want an isometric crushing grip, doing repetitions on the gripper is going to get you bigger forearms and a whole lot of that grip that transfers to a lot of stuff. And remember that reps are the way to build. A lot of people make this big mistake. They'll use the gripper only as a tester. Or they'll, after a whole session of something else, they'll use the gripper and they'll be like, yeah, I closed the number 1, 2 or 3 times in each hand and I'm out. How the fuck do you expect results when you do 2 or 3 reps of something per workout once a week? Are you out of your fucking mind? Train it 2 to 4 times a week. Maybe you can train it fresh because it's easy to train fresh. You don't even need to go to the gym, and do sets of whatever the SFR is best, whatever the pump is best for hypertrophy, and for strength, sets of 5 to 10. So that here's what a set of 5 looks like on a gripper. You have the gripper, you go 1, controlled eccentric. 2, controlled eccentric. 3, just like that. You do 5 to 10. It's going to fuck your ass up and it's going to improve a ton of stuff. Treat your grip training like you train normal training. Treat the gripper like you treat any other bodybuilding machine, period.
Yeah, totally agree. And the thing with, like you said, you do train your grip a lot during training, but there is just kind of a plateauing effect there where your grip is only going to get so much stronger after years and years and years of doing regular training. And at that point, like, the amount of grip strength you gained per time spent doing other things is just piss poor. And if you want to improve your grip strength from that point on, you're going to have to move on to doing direct grip training. And as Mike said, that usually comes from doing repetitions of either forearm training or, in this case, like the crusher. All of those are great options, but you can't expect that you can train it differently and get the same results. Like, a lot of people think the same thing about abs. Like, and I think I largely blame the Arnold's Modern Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, because he talked a whole lot of bullshit in there about training abs twice a day and this and that. And it's like, yeah, that's cute, but ultimately all of your muscles respond in largely, and when I say largely, I'm meaning virtually the same way, with some kind of differences in fiber typing and stuff like that. But ultimately, most muscles respond in the same way to training. So you would treat your forearms or your abs just like any other muscle group.
Yeah, 100%. Abraham Lincoln.
What?
Yep.
Rise from your grave.
Sweet.
Got him.
All right. How big is the difference in gaining, cutting, and maintaining weight over a strength block on long-term progress for strength goals? Here are some assumptions for Here's some assumptions for these scenarios. Assume in all cases that the recommended maintenance phase has been completed following a massing phase, and have only gained 5 to 10% body weight during the massing phase. This is also assuming that in all 3 cases, you want to get back to a similar body fat level as pre-mass body fat before doing another massing phase. So a cut will have to happen at some point in all cases. Does it make sense for long-term progress to cut before starting a strength block, cutting during the strength block, or waiting until after a strength block to cut again? In the case of the hypocaloric strength block, you would take the recommended month of maintenance calories after the mass, just like the cut before a strength block, or maybe a bonus scenario, you just spend your first 4 to 6 weeks of the strength block isocaloric and the remaining, let's say roughly 6 or so weeks hypocaloric, then finish off any fat loss after the cycle before massing again. So Abraham, Mr. Lincoln, rather, President Lincoln.
Yeah, show some respect.
Yeah, for real. How dare I? I'm going to say this, and it's going to be meant with all due respect. This is not a character, so we have to say that relatively often. There is a conflation of 2 goals here. One is bodybuilding style training, and one is strength training. You have to figure out which one you want more of, and then we can help you with your question. Generally speaking, for all applications, strength blocks during fat loss are a bad idea. So just don't do it. If you have to do it as slow as possible, and remember that you fucked up having to do it. A big part of strength, even more than hypertrophy, is being able to sequence progressively harder workouts and having a really good preparedness the entire time. But the preparedness you need to get high quality bodybuilding workouts is not very high. Like right now, I'm at the tail end of a cut. I go to the gym and I just like yell at the weights and go and just do reps, and it's fine. My muscles staying on my body. With strength, you don't show up and you're like, ooh, I'm feeling kind of beat up. Let's do lat pull downs instead of pull ups. No. You have to do low bar squat, and you have to do 505 pounds because last week you did 495. Like, it has to go for 5 reps. That adds up to where you had better be fucking eating. On the other hand, surplus during a strength phase is often not a great idea in the long term, because it results in too much fat accrual. You just get fat. Now, your strength block will go fucking amazing if you're hypercaloric during it. You'll get the best strength gains of your life. However, you'll also be a fat piece of shit afterwards, and you'll have to spend time not gaining strength and reducing the fat. Also, some of the strength gains you'll get will just be from anatomical differences, like your chest will thicken from body fat, your bench will go up. That doesn't really evaluate fundamentally, you may not actually have improved your pushing strength. As soon as you lose the fat, it goes back down and leaving you with at least a lack of conclusion about what worked and what didn't. So we highly, highly recommend at RP, strength and maintenance go like peas and carrots, like Jenny pre-heroin and Forrest Gump, and then significantly after heroin. Not tumultuous 70s Jenny. She doesn't go well with anybody.
I'm biting my tongue. There was many jokes I wanted to make, but
be easy, James.
Yeah,
this is recorded.
Nope.
So peas and carrots, maintenance and strength. That's the fucking best way to go. If you're massing, hypertrophy training. If you're cutting, hypertrophy training. That's the best we can give to you. Now, the way you're sequencing your blocks, I can't tell if strength is number one priority or not. So, for example, you gained 5 to 10% body weight during a massing phase, okay? And then you're saying, I'm going to want to cut this body fat off. Well, if you're truly strength oriented, you kind of don't give a shit. You gain some muscle and some fat, and then for months and months and months, you can just do blocks of strength, getting fucking gnarly strong. And there's going to be some recomp there too. At the end of that process, when you have the strength, then you could be like, okay, I'm in like an interesting body fat situation. How do I get rid of it? And then the answer is probably like a 6 to 8 week hypertrophy mesocycle or block. And then you get rid of all the body fat during that time. And then you thread back into strength, regain all of your lost neural strength and technique over a period of 2 months. And then you're lean and strong. And then you can do a peaking phase, or you can do another mass phase or whatever. So because of the way you said this, Abraham, I may be misjudging you. And it's absolutely my apologies if I did. It seems like as soon as you're getting fat here or fatter, you're like, yeah, strength, good, I have to do that, but I really got to get this fat off. If that's how you're thinking, that's 100% fine. That's how I think. Then you're really doing more bodybuilding stuff. And then you don't need to do any strength phases. You can just do a hypertrophy phase right then after you gain the shit. So you hypertrophy to gain, resensitize, hypertrophy to lose. Then you're back at a lean amount of, or at a lean situation. And then you can start training for strength if you so choose. It's just one of those, like, if your number one concern after gaining mass is that you got fat, you're not a strength athlete. If you are a strength athlete, then that just comes with the game. You have to plan to get rid of it. You can get rid of it up front, but you're probably better off getting rid of it later after you've milked a shitload out of that new body weight. James?
Yeah, those are all really good points. And just another thing too, is kind of what's contributing to our confusing perspective is if you are a strength athlete, you are most likely a weight class sport athlete. And so gaining like 10% of your body weight at any given time would indicate that you're not really taking your weight class very seriously. So there is that idea of like just getting bigger and stronger over time. And maybe you're not concerned about competing in a weight class, but then like, what is the goal if it is strength? Because usually if it's strength, it means you're doing powerlifting, weightlifting, maybe strongman, but most likely powerlifting or weightlifting, and those are weight class and yada, yada. So yeah, it's just not entirely sure where you're going. It sounds like you're going more of a bodybuilding route and you just also want to be strong as a bonus. And that's a totally fine thing to do, but you do have to kind of pick one.
Boom. Next up, Heinrich Anderson.
Wait, hold on. How do you pronounce this name right here? Can you see this? Oh shit, I clicked on it. Fuck.
No.
God damn it.
Find Abraham again and it'll pop up.
Yes. This guy's name.
Let me zoom in on your screen so I can actually read it. So my best guess, I'm not so good at the Slavic pronunciations because they got weird shit going on, but if I was Russian and I know a little bit of the Slavic stuff, Ismar Sachirovich.
Ooh, very nice. Very nice. Yeah. That looks right to me. I have no
They got all those weird little tilde C bullshits.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bitch because in Russia we have a whole fucking alphabet.
All right. Who was that next one?
Henrik Anderson.
Henrik.
James, how well do you remember
God damn it.
RIK?
There we go. Got him.
How well do you remember Die Hard, the first one?
Not that well.
There was one of the terrorists' name was Heinrich, and he had the detonators.
Oh.
That's when I was first introduced to the actor who was in, what the fuck is his name? Love Actually cast. I could have just done Die Hard cast. Alan Rickman.
Oh, yeah.
And Alan Rickman is such a good actor that like other people acting is like an insult to the man. Like if he was still alive and they were like, hey, do you want to do a movie with Alan Rickman? I'd be like, absolutely not worthy. Are you guys out of your fucking minds? Like hire a real actor.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Henrik Anderson says, how come my reps drop about 20% for every set, even though I rest for a long time? I usually do alternating sets between antagonistic muscle groups, back rest 2.5 minutes, chest, rest, repeat, in total 5 to 6 minutes of rest for the muscle itself. I thought to myself, I probably just have fast twitch muscle fibers, but at the same time, the last 3 or 4 reps of most exercises are grinders, no cheating or form breakdowns. What is going on here? Thanks a lot in advance. What's going on here is fatigue. And fatigue comes from a variety of sources, not just the type of muscle fiber you have. There is central nervous system fatigue, peripheral nervous system fatigue, cytokine-mediated fatigue. There is intramuscular energy store fatigue. There is intramuscular metabolite generation. So, for example, you could have metabolites like processes of muscle contraction, or the waste products of muscle contraction, literally clogging up the space between the neuron that talks to your muscle and tells it to fire and the actual muscle. There's just bullshit in there. So the fraction of times the actual shit goes through. Oh, hold on a sec. Todo bien. My cleaning people are here. You guys like that Spanish? Shit is collegiate level, high school level, below high school level. All right. So in any case, you can literally have a situation in which you have like problems with the nerve talking to the muscle, which is another thing that happens when you get really close to failure. On a related note, people think that muscle activation radically skyrockets as you approach failure in a single set. And that's actually not true. Greg Knuckles had a really good explanation on the Stronger by Science podcast about how that works. Basically, your muscles get tired. Everything gets fucked up, right? The more that you get into the situation, and then what that leads to is it's just fatigue. So there's like at least 10 known sources of fatigue. Here's another one, real quick. James, I can't believe I missed this one. You run out of creatine phosphate, and that shit takes like a long time to buffer back to normal. Glycogen, every set you do, there's less glycogen left over. So your body's really good about detecting glycogen and kind of capping you off at like, hey, you should let's not perform just as hard as you just did. So all of that stuff, the entire system gets frayed. My best analogy here is I've been watching a lot of World War II documentaries is imagine you sent fully staffed, fully supplied division into combat and they won and they come back. Now imagine the course of resupply takes, the full resupply would be 2 weeks. That means you replace all the broken tracks on the vehicles. You get all the food. Now the food comes in a couple hours. Broken tracks on vehicles, 2 weeks, right? And then a week later, you're asked to go fight another battle again. What is your performance going to be? Like, well, 2 of our tanks are out and we have 12 total tanks. Now we have 10. And someone could be like, well, what the fuck, you guys? We got 2 weeks. Why aren't you at full strength? Well, there's some shit just takes fucking long time. And believe it or not, battle really fucks shit up. So it's like, and if you rest a very little time, that's like not being able to resupply for food or for sleep. Oh, sorry, one sec. James, please take over whatever I missed. But basically you get tired and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I think Dr. Mike hit it pretty much on the head there. So especially when you're doing the reciprocal kind of antagonist style supersets, one of the problems that you can run into is you start running into like cardiovascular or systemic fatigue spillover, which just starts capping everything. So one of the things that we know is like the more kind of cardiovascularly challenging you make any given exercise or session or activity, the more likely it's going to start having systemic fatigue limitations. And that's just the way it goes. So you might actually be resting like what would otherwise be adequately long per muscle group. So you said like you're roughly about 5 minutes per muscle for the actual, whether it's chest or it's back, like that ends up getting 5 minutes of rest per set. That's true, but you're doing all this other bullshit at the same time. So as Dr. Mike mentioned, there's a lot of different sources of fatigue. One of them is just the cardio and systemic fatigue spillover from doing a lot of things in a short amount of time. So at that point, you basically have a really high training density, which is going to tax, again, the central system's a little bit harder, like your cardio, your ability and willingness to make actual efforts because your RIR is creeping up a little bit more and more just because of all the other stuff you got going on. And that's normal. I wouldn't really sweat it too much. The more dense the training is per unit of time, the more fatigue that it's going to generate, and then the more the reps are going to drop off. That's just completely normal. I wouldn't sweat it at all.
Guys, imagine what would happen if you notice that didn't happen to you. Because a lot of people come in with the default assumption that you shouldn't be getting tired between sets. What the fuck? Can you guys imagine doing a set of 10 in the squat, super hard, racking it, all right. Then another set of 10. Okay. Then another set. Fucking 5 hours later, you're still doing sets of 10. You're like, oh my fucking God, I have superpowers. I don't get tired. How the fuck would that work? And a lot of times, I think, James, like culturally, what really conflates this problem is the 3x10, 3x5, 4x10 type of split. But that necessarily means your RIR is much higher in the first sets than it is in the last. So you RIR 4 on the first set of 10 is RIR 1 on the last set if it's the same load. So don't assume the normality of straight sets because that's abnormal. That is artificial. That is literally caricatured out of thin air by people who just wanted some kind of constancy. True, same RIR, multiple sets, you will get tired. There's no damn thing fucking wrong with that, period.
Yeah, and I forgot who asked this. Was it Heinrich? Who asked this one? Yeah. So Heinrich, like I would say, this is a perfectly fine way to train for most people because they might have time constraints and they just got to get in and out as efficiently as they can. If you're somebody who is not necessarily constrained by time and you want to be like the most buff physique guy that you can be, probably not the best way to train, though still not terrible, just because you are going to start to see performance drop-offs that you would otherwise not see if you just did a set and just took the rest that you needed for that muscle only and then hit it again. So I'm guessing you're doing it because you have like an hour lunch break and this is how when you train and you got to get as much training in as you can. If that's the case, that's perfectly fine. Keep doing what you're doing.
Amlee 888, IMLEE, and then the mark of the beast plus 222.
IML. Sorry, I clicked everything except for what I needed to. There we go. Got it.
For glutes, should my wife focus more on sumo deadlifts and hip thrusts or conventional and ATG squats? Or conventional deadlifts, I think he means, and ATG squats. Asking for her, I think I already know the answer, but she never listens to me. I'm like, you don't have a fucking wife. You're on YouTube, dog. You ain't married to nobody. Your hand's not your wife. Get the fuck out of here. That's like every now and again, people try to razz me on Instagram, all in good fun. They're like, whoa, Dr. Mike, you're posting glute shots. My girlfriend was looking at my phone. I'm like, what girlfriend? Get out of here.
Get out of here.
All right, you got me. But
I'm stealing your girl with my glutes.
That's right. That's right. She's like, oh my God, who's this? Here's the deal. The shitty RP canned answer is the best SFR exercises win.
Which is great.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
So deflects questions. SFR, SFR.
So you just ask your wife where she's feeling which exercises give her the best tension in the glutes, which ones give her the best burn in the glutes, which ones give her the best pump in the glutes, and which ones feel like they're disrupting her glutes a lot. So for example, I think James and I are on a similar page here, but I'll just speak for myself and see how James feels about it. For hip thrusts, mechanically, they're really good for a lot of people. A lot of people swear by them, and I believe that they work because they have to work mechanically. It's high involvement of glutes. When I do them, I've done them for multiple mesocycles before, my stimulus proxies just suck. Like I sort of feel some tension in my glutes, not a ton, only at the very peak. It takes a lot for me to feel a burn in my glutes, but then like the fronts and tops of my quads are burning, so it's kind of not even a limiting factor. As far as pump, like I get a little bit of a pump in my glutes, nothing super crazy, like it's fine, but it takes a lot of sets to get the pump. And then I really just never get sore from it. So the disruption is just seemingly like almost absent. It doesn't even feel that weak afterwards. So I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on. Now, I do a few sets of walking lunges with weight, and my shift fucked up beyond recognition. Unreal tension in the glutes the entire time. Crazy burn in the glutes to where I'm like dying. Enormous pump where I feel like a fucking like horse back there. And then the disruption is so profound that it actually catches me at what James and I call perturbation. Like your muscle's broken. There's something wrong with it. Like it's not DOMS. You're not sore yet. It's like 5 minutes after and you have trouble getting up out of a chair and your glutes are going, boom, boom, boom. They like have benign fasciculations. And you're like, something's wrong. Something was stimulated. Something was targeted. So for me, lunges are the top of the fucking pile for this, but it may not be the case with your wife. Some people get really great glute workouts from conventional deadlifting and aster squatting. Some people get just incomparable shit from sumo deadlifts and hip thrusts. You got to try them all, and you got to get your wife to give you SFR proxies. And of course, fatigue, like which one hurts your joints and so on and so forth, which one feels really, really hard. I'll say this, conventional deadlifts feel really hard. They don't hit your glutes all that well usually because the range of motion is not that great. Sumo deadlifts, especially deficit sumo deadlifts, are just an excellent exercise for the glutes because they do give you that range of motion, and it's a compound lift, and the SFR is usually just higher. So the perceived exertion is not that high because it's not that much weight in your hands, but it's a crazy long range of motion. So you're not, the axial loading isn't nuts. You know, James, like when you pull on a conventional deadlift, you're like, where do you feel it? You're like, I don't know, it's just heavy. Like I'm getting really tired. My spine hurts. When you do right, exactly. My mouth. I think there's blood in my mouth. But then you do sumo deficit pulls, and if you do them for sets of like, 5 to 10 even, no one rep is like the end of the world, but you're like, man, this range of motion is killer. My glutes are fucked up, but your spine feels fine. Like that's kind of what you want out of a hypertrophy move, which actually dovetails into our next question, but I'll save that for after James's commentary. James, what do you think?
Yeah, so the short version, like Mike already said, is it's always SFR. I would say, just based on my experience, like 75% of people, my go-to for glute specific stuff would be like lunges, sumo deadlifts, and the hip thrusts. But that doesn't mean it's the end all be all. Some people respond differently, but those would definitely be like, if I was to start somewhere, that's where I would start. If I wanted to have like a really heavy glute emphasized mesocycle, start with those, go from there.
Last up is lean gains.
Oh, lean gains. Oh, it's a Z.
Is that
he's got like
icon a mosquito?
I can't. It looks like it's a guy with like a middle finger sticking up. I can't tell.
I always think of lean gains. I've got some great comments on other videos. I always think of him as a mosquito. So that's what he gets.
Maybe he is a mosquito. I can't tell.
All right. Lean gains asks, how would you structure sumo deadlifts into a hypertrophy program? I really like them and want them to be my main quad and glute on leg days. They will never be quad and glute because they're a dog shit quad exercise. So you got to, we'll just throw that one away for you. What was that called? Rick and Morty pulling off that Band-Aid early.
Yeah.
Are they as fatiguing as conventional to a point where they can affect workouts? Yes. And should I use other stuff? Maybe. Or can they be considered hypertrophy exercise? Well, so here's the thing. They can for sure be considered hypertrophy exercise, but just like a Goku explained about the Super Saiyan ascension, it has to come from a need, not a desire. Same thing from stimulus to fatigue ratio. Look, I want to do fucking dildo presses, but there's nowhere in my program where they have a good SFR / they don't target muscles that I need. So I won't do them. And lean gains, again, all with all due respect, because we've all been down this road before. trying to rig your hypertrophy program to justify doing certain exercises is got literally the cart before the horse. Like the horse is bad at pushing the cart. Just have them pull it. Your hypertrophy program's logic should be pulling the exercises along. You don't smash an exercise up front. Be like, all right, I got to do this. How do I fuck the rest of my hypertrophy program? Now, look, if you were a client of ours, paying client, and you said, look, this is non-negotiable, I have to have this, we could work a hypertrophy program around it. We'll tell you right now how we would do that. We would almost certainly tell you to try to do deficit sumo deadlifts because the range of motion and the activation of the glutes at the bottom is super great. We'd have you do them as sets of 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 reps. We'd have you do them probably in a real bodybuilding context after some sets of lunges and hip thrusts so that your glutes are really pre-fatigued. You don't have to use as much weight. And then you would do that ideally only once a week, maybe twice a week with different rep ranges, but really you would limit that pretty significantly because it's super fucking taxing anyway. And then the rest of your work would come from other stuff. So that's the answer to your exact question. But I think the better answer, and I'm sure James will have more to say about this, is can you justify putting in exercises and rigging the rest of your program? Yeah, you can. Totally. We're all human. And sometimes you just want to fucking have fun with an exercise you like. But be careful because that road does lead you to good and bad places. You don't want to close your eyes down that road and take your hands off the steering wheel and all of a sudden end up with a program in which you're doing a bunch of lifts that you like, but you don't have any results to show for it. And someone's like, dude, how come your glutes haven't come up? You're like, because I've been ignoring the good exercises I know have good SFRs to do exercise I like. Come on, like that doesn't make any goddamn sense. So careful.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Mike here. And another problem that you run into with these exercises that you like is maybe they do have a good SFR and that's groovy, but then you're like, okay, I've really been grooving on these sumo deadlifts. I'm going to build my next hypertrophy mesocycle around it. Well, guess what happens, around like week 6 of sumo deadlifts that you've now been doing collectively for several months because you really enjoyed them and you just started your new program with them. They've gone flat. Oh, now what? Like now you have to strategically vary them out and you've built this ridiculous program around this one exercise because it has so many different constraints. And now you're really having to juggle a lot of different things as a result of having to switch out this one fucking movement, right? So it's okay to do that. But the problem that you get is if it goes stale on you, now you've just made your whole program around this one movement and you're basically having to start over. So that kind of sucks because now you're not going to be carrying any momentum for the rest of your mesocycles because you're literally having to switch so many things around. And maybe you can have some things stay largely the same and that's great, but it's just such a fuss. So I would say, like Mike said, again, it's putting the cart before the horse. Like pick the things that train what you want really well. And like, yeah, you can cycle back to some of those movements that you like, but never make one exercise the focal point of a program. Even powerlifting, you can only you have to pick 3. You can't pick one. Sorry. Oh, I thought Mike was flagging me down, right? You got squat, bench, and deadlift. At least that's more than one. Weightlifting, you got snatch and clean and jerk, which is really like, I guess, a couple different exercises if you think about it. But anyways, for bodybuilding, you don't need to be that constrictive. I think it's just a big waste of your time.
100%. That's it. That's all 10.
Okay, so we got some good news, folks. Again, thanks for your questions.
And some bad news.
And some bad news. So I started doing my final pass on the final version of the hypertrophy book. So I'm hoping to have any comments. Hopefully I won't have any, but if anything comes up, I'm hoping to have those by the end of the week. That'd be pretty cool. So that's good news.
Yep. And then after that, I do my final pass and the book is done.
Your final pass at the same time for time purposes, but
almost
done. Almost done, which is great. Anything else, Mike, you got going on?
Nothing I'm going to talk about until it happens.
Oh, cryptic.
I like the double wink.
If you guys are gamers, I just picked up Subnautica and it's really awesome. Highly recommend. It's easy way to lose yourself like 5 hours at a time. It's very immersive.
Yeah,
it's just one of those games you start playing and then you look at the clock and you're like, fuck, I spent all day playing this game. Jesus.
What system is that on?
I think it's on a bunch of platforms. I'm playing it on PS4 and it's pretty awesome.
When does the PS5 come out?
It's out.
Oh, are you excited? Is it getting good reviews or what?
It's really early on, and a lot of people haven't been able to get their hands on one. So, but so far, most of the reviews seem like it's really awesome. The tech is really good. The interfaces are really good. There's not a lot of games out, and not a lot of the games have taken advantage of some of the new hardware features. So, like Mike, you'll like this one. One of the features is on the controller where it has the trigger that, like on the back of the controller that usually is used to shoot for things, it actually has a different response for different guns. So you can set the tension on the trigger differently. So like a rocket launcher in a game will have a different trigger pull than like a handgun, stuff like that. So there's a bunch of like really wild features out there that are really interesting. But it's like it's the hardware, but the game developers have to make software that takes advantage of the hardware. So we'll see.
Totally. That's crazy.
So yeah, if you guys are interested in games, check that out. I think that's about it for me. Folks, thanks for shooting in your good questions. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube for all things RP. We got videos from me. Dr. Mike and I do the weekly webinar. Mike has 1,000 videos. I know Spencer has some videos. I just saw one with Nick where he was talking about his book. So all sorts of good stuff on there. Folks, check out our YouTube. Thanks for asking questions, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.